Salv, it's great seeing you again. You're a coffee...
It's been a while, huh?
It has been a while.
Yeah, you look great.
So do you.
Thank
It's
you.
been what, 10 years I think, since we
You
last...
haven't aged at all.
Oh, thank you. Neither of you.
Thanks.
You're a coffee pioneer.
Thank you.
The owner of the St. Ali family.
That's correct.
And a former lawyer.
Indeed.
Tell us about your story from law to business.
Well, you know, my legal career was an interesting one because I started my articles at a firm called Aroni Coleman, which is no more, and those in the legal fraternity will know why. And it's a fun story, but maybe it's a side story. And Aroni Coleman merged with a firm after that moment in time with a firm called Gatehouse. And I was working at Gatehouse, and I was working in property and tax, and you know, I realised pretty early on, I went to the University of Melbourne and I did an arts law degree, and I majored. I was lucky enough, not quite sure how I did this, but I did graduate with honours, but I was never detailed enough with word copy to be a really good lawyer. I knew that in my heart. I was kind of more intuitive understanding of a macro situation and lacked the patience and diligence to drill down to detail. So I knew that from the get-go, but I thought I'd give it a go, and I gave it a go, and then I realised, you know, incremental billing units didn't help very much, but that when I was sitting in a cubicle trying to draft a clause, it wasn't me. And so, but I was fortunate because I started my first cafe at the University of Melbourne while I was studying there, and it was called Caffeine. That was in 1993, and then by the time I graduated, I had 15 cafes, and it was all in the tertiary space. And I guess some people say that we changed the culinary landscape at university level, and I guess we did. So I had something to fall back on. So I remember the day as if it was yesterday. When I decided to move on, I sent a global email around to the entire firm, and I thanked those who'd been good mentors along the way, and I also did something which was probably not considered a very professional move. I highlighted those who had made my life difficult. And so I blew up the legal bridge, so to speak. And the day, it was an interesting story, the day that for me I realised I mean, apart from not thinking I was very good at being a lawyer, was I was dragged into the managing partner's office, and I was wrapped over the knuckles because I had installed a coffee machine in my office. And apparently that was a no-no, and I couldn't believe there was such a big deal was made out of something so simple. So then anyway, once I'd done that, I'd blown up the legal bridges. I was stuck with making what I'd done work. So here I am.
Wow, it's incredible.
Thanks.
You always knew law wasn't for you. What made you go down that path?
You know, I think I respect lawyers in the same way that I respect, you know, physicians and surgeons and so forth. Like, I think it's those who are great at it can change the world. I mean, if you're a human rights lawyer and you're brilliant, you can affect change in a global political sense. And even if you're not working in the touchy-feely space, but you're working more in the policy, you can also you know, help shape and shift and craft policy to help or put forward a certain political view, and that stuff's great, you know. And the guys who make it to the top of the tree, and you know, let's start with the people. When I was growing up, some of my heroes were people like Ron Merkel and Michael Kirby and those guys. I mean, they're legends, you know. And so I was always a firm believer of separation of state, church, and you know, and judiciary. So I think lawyers have a very important role in society. It's just, I think, and so though as times changed, laws become more of a generalist degree, and I think it's a phenomenal base for anyone wanting to do anything, but in particular business. So I would recommend it to anybody. I hope my kids will go through it and do law degrees. Yeah.
When you made the transition from law to business, did you face any hurdles or challenges from family, friends?
Sure. So, you know, as my name suggests, Salvatore Malatesta. I'm an Italian boy, and there are a couple of things that make an Italian mother happy: being a priest, being a doctor, or being a lawyer. even more so than being the president of the United States of America. So when I resigned from being a lawyer, you can only imagine my mum's heart was broken in 15 pieces. So she wasn't particularly excited. My then wife was also not hugely excited by the idea, but it's something I needed to do. So I felt enormous relief and enormous freedom, and I felt like this burden, it was like an elephant sitting on my chest, had just been lifted.
Yep. How many years have you been running businesses now for?
I'm 44 years old. Yep. This is your opportunity to say you don't look a day over 35.
Yeah. 35.
And I think I started my first business when I was 21. Wow. So 23 years. Incredible. And everybody associates me, and I'm grateful for with Sonali and coffee. Yeah. And that's been the bulk of my work. But I also had a fashion label for a while. Had an IT business, had a travel agency, which is now a listed company. We've done a lot of developments and construction work. So I'm an entrepreneur in the true sense.
Yeah, definitely are. How many have you owned?
88 food and beverage
That's
venues.
Incredible. But how many have you run and owned at the same time? So
okay, so that's a good question. So probably no more than 15 at once. Okay. I think at the moment we're about 11. Yeah. I think you need as you get larger in retail, your structures need to be robust and systems need to be in place. And as I was saying before, I'm not a very good lawyer, not very good on systems in detail. This time round, we've taken our time in building the foundations. So there's a board, there's a CFO, and there's a cluster manager and a retail manager and general manager. There's lots of layers. And having layers requires enormous faith and patience, because layers chew up what is essentially income and essentially bottom line.
And with the businesses, have you run them by yourself, or you've been in partnership with others?
I've done everything from sole to one partner to multiple partners. I've always been the majority stakeholder, so in a sense I've always been the architect of my own destiny. So even today, there's still silos, and I own 100% in certain silos, and I'm the majority stakeholder in the other silo. And what we've done with our wholesale business mainly is we've offered long-term staff an opportunity to buy in, and I think we've got 9 smaller shareholders who all range from the green bean buyer, procurement officer, to the roaster, to the delivery driver, to the CFO, and so forth.
Yeah. How has that worked from a staff, retaining staff?
It's been excellent. Firm believers. I am a firm believer of aligned interest, and I think whenever you can get everybody on the one-page plan and sharing the vision, you have a much stronger, united, position.
Yeah. Some people are really attracted to the idea of business and starting their own legal practice. What are some of the realities they should know?
The question I get asked is, can everybody be an entrepreneur, or should everybody be an entrepreneur? I'm going to borrow something that I read a while ago in Robert Kiyosaki's book. He talked about the cash flow quadrant, and he talked about people being an E, an S, a B, or an I. So E for employee, S for self-employed, B for business person, and I for investor, and all the character traits that those people have. So an E tends to ask questions like, how many weeks holiday do I get? And an S tends to say things like, I'm the only person who can do this job, self-employed. And B, people tend to say things like, I'm looking for a general manager or a good CFO. And I, people tend to say, investors, what's the rate of return? And the premise of Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow quadrant is that you want to be an I, and then you're freed from financial shackles. I think that's probably right, but there's also something else. I think you need to do a self-psych test about risk profile. And if you have a low risk profile, then it's probably not going to work out for you. If you have a high risk profile and a detachment policy to stuff, and if you have the ability to compartmentalise, then it's probably going to work out for you. What do I mean by this? I mean, if you can sleep at night once you've taken a risk, tick. If you can't, cross. If you lose shit and feel sad about it, cross. If you can lose some stuff and have complete attachment to it, tick. You know, if you are able to compartmentalise things in your life, so when things go wrong, as they always do, you can compartmentalise that, put it away and deal with the next issue, tick. If you can't compartmentalise that and you catastrophise that scenario, cross. So that's sort of self-analysis work you need to do. And so I think that being honest at that point will determine whether you can give being an entrepreneur a true shot. Of course, there are plenty of examples, especially in the dot-com era we live in, that coders or programmers have invented whatever, an app or and managed to pull that off without any sort of sense of entrepreneurialism, perhaps or perhaps not. But those guys also were doing stuff they loved and were happy to not earn any money, and so it was like a Tath Lotto ticket. So if I don't know, you've got commitments to outs like a mortgage and 3 children in private schools, and you need to earn money, then you need to know that you know, unless you can tick the other boxes, you're going to have a lot of anxiety. So in short, I think entrepreneurialism is, I think the skill set of an entrepreneur can be learnt, but the emotional requirements of an entrepreneur are probably innate.
How has your law degree and practicing as a lawyer helped you succeed in business?
Okay, so you know, the best stuff is the corporate governance stuff. You know, just making sure that I've considered legislative risk in every decision. That's pretty handy. And I guess tax planning is also pretty handy. So a lot of people are scared of the Tax Act or don't want to know about tax, and it's a bit of a strange thing for me when people feel that way, because you know, taxes affects every business decision, and whether you're getting some back or giving some away, or you know, using various structures to you know, put yourself in the best possible net tax position, you should understand tax. And for whatever reason, not even many lawyers care about tax. I think it's because maybe tax is boring, but I think when you're an owner of stuff, tax is really exciting.
Have you been able to draw on any of your drafting skills back from when you did it into business? Yeah,
no, of course. So whenever you know, we're preparing a heads, you know, memorandum of understanding, I draft those myself. So that's pretty handy. If I was, you know, putting a REMS uplift in someone's salary package, I might draft that myself.
And for lawyers wanting to take that leap and go into business, what advice, to run their own legal practice, what advice would you give them? I
think you probably need to be a finder to go off on your own, because if you're not a finder, it ain't gonna come from the sky.
With running your own business, any sort of business, what sort of hours?
Yeah, right, so that's a good question, because you know, I think the thing I enjoy most about my business is there is no work-play divide. It's all the one thing. So, you know, and I've heard, I've read, and people talk about, you know, I think it's a myth, by the way, work-play divide. I think anyone who's excellent in anything tends to think about it all the time or work on it. So I'll give you an example. I'll give you a primary sort of, you know, simple example of what I mean, and then I'll give you possibly a more complicated example. So I have a guy who works for me who makes coffee, who is a latte art champion. And he makes coffee for 10 hours a day, and then he goes home at night time and goes to his lab at home and makes coffee for another 5 hours a day. Because he wants to win the World Barista Latte Art competition. Is that a divide? In my mind, that guy's committed to both work and play it the same way. So, you know, athletes, you know, who are trying to make the Olympics, you know, for 3 years before the Olympics, they eat X calories per day, go to bed at 8 p.m, train 7 hours, whatever the regime looks like. and there's no partying on Fridays because there's a regime. If you want to be successful in business, you're always on. And if you can't always be on, or you find that difficult, then you probably shouldn't do it as well. And so I guess from my perspective, I'm fortunate because I think I can take off whatever time that I want to take off, and I do. I mean, I travel with my 3 small kids for 3 months a year, and we go on family holidays, but I'm quite happy to jump on the phone and do a deal if I'm in Chiang Mai or New York or Rome. So I don't. And when you work for someone, you can actually switch your phone off in theory, unless you are a partner in a law firm. Then you probably can't switch your phone off, especially if you're in litigation.
Yes, that's really good advice. Sal, thank you so much for
Pleasure.
Taking the time out. I know you're a
Thank you.
businessman, so thank you.
No worries.
Thanks.
Cheers. Thank you.